To be inside the regional food bank of Northeastern New York and Latham is breathtaking, not only in its size, but its capacity for hunger and security in the capital region and beyond. When CEO Tom Nardacci walked into the facility a little more than 3 years ago, he knew as much about the 70,000 square foot distribution center as I did during my tour earlier this month. Now, 3 years later, he knows not only every inch of it, but every single employee we encountered on a busy Tuesday morning as food entered and exited the facility. He has added scale to the operation, spearheaded the fundraising for a new distribution center in Orange County that opened without debt, and has partnered with a warehouse in the furthest points of the state to ensure that the North Country continues to be served. I talked to CEO Tom Nardacci in a conference room adjacent to a newly built employee kitchen and conference area about his first 3 years and what the future holds for him and the Regional Food Bank of Northeastern New York.
All right, Tom Nardacci, this is, I think, in my opinion, the world's largest grocery store that we're sitting in right now at the Regional Food Bank here in Latham. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time for this. And it's fortuitous because everything, as we talked about, everything I read was when you kind of came on board.
Mm-hmm.
And now we are 3 years later. So this is the opportune time to talk about where the Regional Food Bank was and then where it is now and then your plans for the future. But the journey is son of a grocer and then your whole career is marketing.
Right.
You're involved in things. You're a business guy. You're involved in all sorts of businesses. And then all of a sudden you become the GM for a Stu Leonard's on steroids here in the Albany capital region. So how did you go from selling the story, Gramercy and Bull Moose, to the Regional Food Bank?
Yeah, I think you start in the right place, right? So my grandparents had a grocery store. My grandfather was a butcher in the city of Rensselaer for 50 years. So my whole family lived on that same block. So when I tell people, I'm 50, but when I tell people how I grew up, they think I grew up in the 50s, right? Because we sat on the stoop. We listened to the Yankees on the radio. Like, it was a very traditional kind of urban upbringing, right? And it's right out of a, kind of a Norman Rockwell, maybe post-Norman Rockwell setting where, it was just this urban neighborhood where we knew everyone. And my grandparents worked, 365 days a year. Christmas Day, they closed at noon, So I saw that growing up, and I worked in the store. I was never paid, but when they first started recycling bottles, my job was to, organize the bottles, and go in the back room and not touch anything and break anything, don't touch the sharp knives, don't touch the adding machine, but put prices on things. And so I grew up around business, and I credit my grandparents with a lot. In my office today, in my office at Gramercy, the whole time I was there's a picture of my grandfather sitting on the stoop of the store, and that's purposeful. Like, I've always had that with me because it's a reminder of like where I came from, how I grew up, and kind of the values that my family instilled in me. And that's why I was drawn to business. I'd started my career in politics. I worked for our Congressman, Mike McNulty, a long time, and then had worked in the state assembly for a few years. So I did 3 years in kind of legislative affairs, and that's where I first got introduced to communications. I decided quickly I wasn't a policy wonk, that I liked the action. I liked the newsrooms. I like mixing up with reporters, and I love seeing that side of politics. So I kind of started out in that, and then ultimately created my own PR firm, and then did work in the capital region for 15 years. But even when I had that business, I was always trying to do things that were community oriented. Whether it was supporting the Boys and Girls Club, where I grew up, or supporting other causes, art causes, or different things kind of community related. So I always felt like that was a big part of our kind of had this like George Bailey effect, right? Like, you have this business, but like you have an obligation to do good in your community. And, I took that seriously. And then, later on, as you mentioned, I bought a building in downtown Troy because, I'm from Rensselaer County. I had been had been involved in the downtown community that had been vacant for 30 years. And I opened up a co-working space called Troy Innovation Garage. It was I still own it. I don't actively manage it, but it's still, still own that property, and just created an incubator for small businesses, right? Because that's really my background. I had a small business. My grandparents had a small business. How can I help other small business owners and really do it as a social enterprise? And so did that, sold Gramercy, like you said, in 2021, and was trying to figure out what's next. Pandemic had hit. I wasn't going to be a big time real estate developer, where people working in offices or what that world looked like. So I really pivoted and mostly focused on things I had done during the pandemic. Pandemic hit, and I think a lot of people, started to think about what they were doing with themselves, how they were spending their time. And, I had a lot of free time because I'd sold my business, and started volunteering. And I started volunteering at a senior center in my hometown in Rensselaer, a couple hundred feet from the train station, 100 seniors living in a low-income housing site, and started delivering meals once a week. That led to what other needs did they have, and we started to we connected with the regional food bank to get supplies, food supplies dropped once a month, where we could help seniors fill their shelves. And I really believe in kismet. I believe in fate. I believe that things happen for a reason. I think that I did that, and it was purposeful. And happened to see that the food bank was looking for a CEO. I hadn't applied for a job in 20 years, right? That's what happens when you're a business owner, right? You don't have a resume all of a sudden. And then I applied, and I said, look, at least I'll apply and I'll try, and it was a competitive process, and, got through the first round of interviews and got through the second round, and all of a sudden I said, well, I think this might be a thing. And then it all happened very quickly. Within 2 months, I was the CEO of this organization that has a really long, important history in New York State and in this region, and one of the first food banks in the country. And so, like you said, I'm coming up on finishing 3 years here. It's been it's a great honor. It's a great thing we do in the community. But I view myself as, look, I'm a steward of this organization, right? As a nonprofit CEO, it's different when you own your own business, right? And you have a lot more, controls and a lot more at stake, and in some ways, in terms of it's your own money, and you're paying things out. But I take that same seriousness here, where I feel like I'm very obligated to make sure that this organization is successful, not just this year, but over the next couple of years. And we've done a lot growing. The things we walked around, I showed you today, we've done a lot of change that's happened in the last couple of years.
And that's, for me, this is my first time here, and you took me on a tour, and it was fantastic. It's breathtaking. It's eye-opening. It's a monster. It's a combination of supermarket, food distribution, FedEx, volunteer, assembly line, in a sense, manufacturing, because you're manufacturing these food boxes. What were you like? I mean, I'm basically overwhelmed right now on my tour. What was it like on your tour going through this? I mean, were you nervous? Were you anxious? Were you excited when you're like touring the then facility?
I think, so when you look at this organization, you said it all right. It's a big orchestra, right? To manage. I mean, there's so many moving pieces here. I had not been through the food bank myself before. I had interviewed for the job, so I didn't fully appreciate how big food banks are. This organization has a $40 million budget, and then on top of that, $60 million worth of donated food. So in total, we're managing $100 million. So it's a good sized organization, for the capital region and in upstate New York. We serve 1,000 different agencies. So food pantries, soup kitchens, school programs, senior programs. It's a huge network. And so I think for me, and I'll get back to your original question, which is the size, but I really focus on the small, like you saw me today, like engaging with like an agency, like seeing what they have in their shopping cart. I grew up in my grandfather's store. So that customer service, can't come second nature to me. Did you get what you need? What else are you looking for? What were you hoping to get? Did you hear about this thing? So I think for me on a daily basis, I try to break it down to that level. And that kind of keeps me grounded. So you don't get caught up in the expansiveness of it. I mean, the reality is it's sad that we have to have such a large charitable food system in this country, right? We have this country of enormous wealth that everyone should be fed, right? And it's unfortunate that we have to have it, but we do. And there's a system that I think that's very well developed. There's 200 food banks across the country. Like I said, even our network, there's 1,000 agencies we provide. So it's really good that we have a network like this, that food banks exist to provide those resources, because we can access food at scale. Whereas back in the day growing up, that food pantry was like the basement of a church, go around the back door, we're open 2 hours a week, and you get what you get. And it's really evolved to a choice system. So the food you were seeing today it's all top notch, right? Farm fresh, right from the farm, eggs from Argyle, right? We're getting, locally produced juice. We're getting, meat products. So so having that variety is very important. When I first walked in, I had never done warehousing and logistics. I didn't work at Hannaford in high school, so I worked at my grandparents' store, which, my grandfather was a butcher. It was a very small shop, right? So the size of it was new to me. But I also had an understanding that, look, I didn't need to know how to manage the warehouse. And I said that. I said, look, if you're looking for a warehouse director, it's not me. We have people in operations and logistics that come from industry backgrounds. And so really as a CEO here, it's managing all the people who know what, it's that good to great mentality, which is you have the right people in the right seats on a bus. And so coming in here and making sure that we had the right people in places. And there were places where we had people in positions that they had been there a while, but maybe weren't the right fit, and had to make those changes. And I think my business mindset was helped with that, where I was able to say, look, we can make a transition and it'll be okay. There are people in the work who are qualified to do these things. It's like being a reporter, and you don't have to know how to go out and typeset, and print the pages. There's people to do it, but you can learn it. And I think that's the one thing I've always been inquisitive, and so I've been really excited. I've learned a lot. Now I know a lot about warehousing. I know a lot about inventory management. I know a lot about logistics and transportation. These are all things that I've learned, and have brought in experts. We brought in an inventory management expert that works with food banks across the country to come in and work with us. And because, as I mentioned, we've tried to bring data analytics, into this place, which didn't really have it before. So I think that's kind of my mindset, is let's find the experts. And being a consultant myself in the past, I understand the value of that.
In the past 3 years, let's talk a little bit. I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about the physical improvements to the property, to the campus, expansion, and then the internal side, because there's some great things that are so important that I think just in the conversation we had, have made such a huge difference. So what's been some in the past 3 years, those big gains here on campus under your tutelage?
So day one, I walk in and was handed a construction contract to build a new facility in Orange County. Not funded. You have to sign this contract, right? So that was kind of day one. And there had been a plan for a number of years to build a sister distribution center that we have in Albany County and Orange County that serve the Hudson Valley. The food bank's footprint, our service area goes from Rockland County to the Canadian border, west to Amsterdam, Cooperstown. So it's 23 counties. It's a large service area. You can't serve all those agencies from Albany County. So commitment had been thought about for a long time. Commitment made to build this facility. So signed that construction document after reviewing it and having people I know review it, and then set myself out to raise the money to build it. All in as a $25 million project. So I spent 2 years fundraising in the Hudson Valley, an area that I didn't know a lot of people, right? I know a lot of people in Albany and a lot of people in the capital region, but got to know a lot of great people in those 6 counties. Some great foundations that supported us, individual donors, corporations that that supported us. And so we raised $25 million and paid for that facility. We opened it in February of last year with no debt. So that's huge that we didn't finance. We didn't have to finance. We raised the money to pay for it. So we have a new facility that we opened. We expanded in the Hudson Valley region. Long time coming. So that's been a big focus on expansion. But also, we do have a strategic plan here. It's a 5-year plan. That was a growth plan. So I think walking in, I think I have a good growth mindset. So I think, probably the right fit for this type of plan to come in and help grow the organization. So I've spent the last 3 years growing the organization. When I started, we had 126 employees budgeted. We had 106 here, so we had 20 open positions, and most of them are in operations. Some of it was pay competitiveness. We have it's competitive to hire warehouse workers here. We have a lot of competition from the private sector, right? We have all our store partners all have facilities. We have Amazon. So there's a lot of competition for warehouse workers in the capital region. So we did some things here. We brought up pay, starting pay to make it competitive, and just try to create an environment that, listen, the difference between us and like a private sector employer is, we have a mission, and like trying to appeal to people who really want to work in a place that had a mission. And I think universally you find all the employees here are committed to the mission. That maybe they take a couple less dollars an hour, but they know that the food that they're moving around goes to neighbors in need. So I really built a culture internally around that, around mission and around team and around support. So I think that's been supportive, important. This facility here in Latham and Albany County is older. We moved in here in 1997. So there's a lot of work here to make it resilient. One of the first weeks on the job, I tried to find out where our generator was and was told that we don't have a generator. How do we not have a generator in a facility that has coolers and freezers and, millions of pounds of food? And so I set out about trying to get a generator here. And so was able to work with Albany County. Actually, they had some leftover ARPA money. And so we got funding from Albany County, and we have a generator here now. So, and the power does go out in Albany County during snowstorms. And the power did go out here a couple months into my tenure. And I had to get a tutorial on how to turn the compressors back on. And it's like the inside of a Navy destroyer with like the buttons and switches, so I figured that out. But and our new facility in Orange County has a generator from day one. So it's stuff like that. It's just coming in saying, why don't we have that? It's that kind of inquisitive mindset of like, shouldn't we? Isn't that a thing? Like, how do we do it? Well, we don't have the money. We never raised it. And I was like, well, why don't we just go get the money? And having that kind of that mindset. So north of Latham, what do we do? So, we distribute to Malone in Franklin County. It's 3.5 hours away by tractor trailer, and we drop food in a parking lot for agencies. So right now we're working with an agency partner in Franklin County and in Plattsburgh that has some underutilized warehouse space. And we're trying to figure out if we could operate a satellite location in that facility. Because I feel like, we have a duty. We have a duty to distribute food equitably. And, the North Country should be served just as well as, the southern end of our territory. So we're working on that this year. So that's exciting.
We talked about, the external things here, but as we were walking around, one thing that our lives in business and obviously in my industry is analytics and where's your traffic and things like that. And you talked about bringing on an analytics department, but it's a different sense of analytics. But again, it kind of still goes to that massive grocery store of turning over inventory, not wasting inventory because it is perishable. So many things are perishable. How important and how much of an impact has that made with you bringing in, talk a little bit about your data analytics department of analyzing what do we have and then how do we turn it and then what do we figure out what we need? I mean, how big of can you put a dollar amount on the impact that's had?
Yeah, I think one of the things, so coming into this position, one of the things that struck me early on was, there were very few formal reports that were coming to me, and we had a lot of people who had been here for a long time. And I think the food bank, has been lucky that we've had long-term staff, people 20 years, 15 years, 30 years, some people that they know the job and they've been doing it for a long time. the challenge is eventually those people leave. So like, and I recognize that, and not trying to displace the workforce, and we balance that out. I've tried to, huddle around me people who have been here a long time. So I've learned a lot from people who have been here a long time. Number one, they're the core people sitting at my table, but also bringing in new people, people with industry experience, people with other expertise, and trying to balance out kind of long time staff with kind of new ideas and kind of new innovation. So on the data side, look, my grandfather knew every can of green bean, right? He knew how many green beans cans he sold. He knew how much hamburger he sold, kind of the week before, Christmas, right? Like he knew all that. But in the business this size, you can't operate like that. You have to have, you have to use technology, and you have to use that mindset. So we did create a data analytics department, and I part of what I've done over the last couple of years is visit a lot of other food banks. So I try to go visit other food banks and see what they do. And there's other food banks that I went to that I learned from them kind of what they were doing and how they were analyzing and how they were reporting and what their KPIs are, and how they were measuring success. And so I try to port those ideas back here. And we brought someone in who's got 15 years, worked at GE to start, but then had worked in the food business too. So brought someone in to create our data analytics department. My first hire in data analytics, though, was a guy who was working in our freezer, who I had met at our staff retreat and talked to him. And I said, "What did you do before you came here?" He said, "Well, I really love data, and he worked for a large private enterprise here locally. And, he was in our freezer pulling orders." And I was like, "I got to get this guy out of the freezer and get him behind a computer screen." And he is a data wizard. He just wanted to work at the food bank. He wanted to work in a positive place. He just was in the wrong seat on the bus. So I got him out of our freezer, which you walked into -10. I put him behind a computer screen. He can manage any data. He can produce any report. This guy is a whiz. And you got to find those people that are just wizards with stuff like that. He's a wizard. Then I bring this other guy in with the other experience. And now, for example, our purchasing, for example, before we might purchase in excess, where we have open pallet spaces, let's fill it. It's really not what you should do. You really want your ordering to be responsive. We shouldn't lay out all that cash, right? So we've helped manage cash flow. But I would, and the other thing we did is I brought in a new purchasing director. Our purchasing director came from industry. He was someone that had been doing business at the food bank for 30 years. And he had said to me a couple of years from retirement, I'd love to finish my career at the food bank. How do you not scoop that guy up? He's got 30 years with the private sector experience. He comes in here. He knows how to negotiate. He knows how to shop. He finds better product for lower prices. I mean, in terms of what we saved, millions, easily, millions of dollars. I think just in purchasing alone, finding the best deals. And I think ultimately that's good for the people we serve, and it's good for the people who donate the money here. Most of the business here is privately funded. And so we want to be good stewards of what people are donating.
In my travels with the Daily Gazette, through COVID and things like that, it was a whole new world. I had a very easy career in sports. 4:00 soccer game, 3-2. That's the end of it. There's no revoting. There's no lawsuits or anything like that. You get a kid and a coach. I was living pretty easy. COVID brought an exposure to the value of food banks, the term food insecurity. Myself and my family didn't know. I'll learn that 5 weeks on the job, and as it became part of our lives, and it continues to be. And then in conversations with food banks that I speak to, every single time I talk to a food bank or a pantry or something like that, they talk about what they need. And for them, it's always cash, because they can take that dollar, come to the food bank, and make that dollar go so much further than they could anywhere else. So that's the capability you have for the scale for them to purchase through you certain items, and bring that dollar further. But at the same token, you are taking your dollars, in the conversation we had, you're taking your available dollars and you're putting those dollars, as much as you can, back locally into the communities you serve.
Yeah.
Is that another, we need to know about this.
Yeah.
That the food bank's not only helping those in need, it's helping those in business,
Right.
in the food business. And how much of that have you steered towards that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's an important initiative of mine, is to work with smaller businesses, to work with small family farms, and to do business with them. When I was in business, I always believed in spreading your business around, right? Like, you'd have core suppliers or you'd have core clients, but that was always my mentality, is to work with a variety of different people. And coming here, first of all, it's such a massive operation, like you said. It's tractor trailer loads at a time, right? So we're moving 54 million pounds of food a year. Every tractor trailer is 35, 40,000 pounds of food. So there has to be a mindset of like scale, like, okay, we have to buy as much as possible at the best possible price. Majority of the food that we get here is donated, right? So we get donated food from Market 32 Price Chopper, from Hannaford, from Walmart, from Target, from farms, from producers. The food bank doesn't exist without those food industry partners, first and foremost. So these are corporate citizens that are going out of their way to make sure that we're in operation. Most of the food that we get, we give out to those agencies we serve at no cost. So those are items, all the dairy, all the milk, all the bread, all the produce, all the fruits and vegetables, all that goes out with no cost. And that's where like food banking's evolved. 15, 20 years ago, it probably was more can and box based, and we've really gone out of our way to have better options, better choice, right? So like the stuff you saw today was like, it's as good as, sometimes we get stuff that is better code date than you could see in a grocery store. Like, because we buy yogurt directly from Chobani. We get a tractor trailer yogurt directly from them. And that's good business. Chobani's investing to build a bigger facility in New York State. They're building another $1 billion facility. So we want to do business with Chobani, a local success story. Started here, created this, yogurt empire from the capital region. Like, we want to do, and they're great to us. We actually, with Chobani developed a shelf-stable milk product that's only available to food banks and to Red Cross. And us and Syracuse are our first two food banks in the country to get this shelf-stable milk that we call super milk. But that's a local company that's done well on a global scale that continues to give back locally. So that's one. So in terms of making agency dollars go, we spend a lot of time trying to get resources for those agency partners, whether it's administering the contracts in New York State has, so that all those food pantries have funds, right? They have funds on account, or private donors and foundations that we manage the money for all those agencies, right? So that they have those funds, because there's things that we have to buy co-op. There's those canned goods and there's shelf-stable stuff that we have to buy, but we buy it for pennies on a dollar and then resell it for pennies on a dollar as well. So that's important. One of the things that I've tried to do when I got here, I wrote a purchasing policy for the food bank, right? We're developing SOPs, so that internal work you're talking about, there's just those things that were like, well, we've always done it that way. But as a business, you need redundancy and you need systems and you need processes. So we developed a purchasing policy. And in the purchasing policy, I wrote that we were gonna give favoritism to local businesses, that we were gonna go out of our way to try to source from local and small businesses. So that's a piece of our business right now. So one of the things that we're doing is we have a micro purchasing program, we call it, where we work with local county level, local farms and local producers. We buy directly from those farms and then we keep the food local. So some of that food we don't even get back here. It just 20 cases from this farm goes right to the agency. So in Rensselaer County, for example, we're piloting this in Rensselaer County, and we work with a variety of farms, and then those farm products go directly to 5 or 6 agencies. So Unity House in Troy, for example, which we have a great relationship with. We get farm products and it goes right to Unity House, and they use it for their soup kitchen. They use it for their shelter programs. So that's a great program, but that's stuff we're buying. So if you buy 20 cases from a local farmer, a couple $1,000s, it makes their week. It could make their month. And I think that's something, because we are a business of scale. So we want to, circulate those dollars locally.
I got 3 left for you. So Eric knows. You survive COVID, you come on outside of COVID into the regional food bank. Then you get the gut punch that was the SNAP stop. And that's where regional food bank became part of almost a daily conversation in the news, in the print media, on the television news, and then obviously nationally, with the work that you did. How, again, I think like COVID, you never saw it coming. I think you were always aware of, possible things may change. You talked about USDA changes and things like that, funding, decreasing, but I don't think anyone ever expected a hard stop.
Yeah.
How'd you manage that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. I think what you said earlier is true, which is COVID kind of unveiled to most of us that there are issues. Food insecurity is a thing, and it kind of put a face to it, right, and put action to it. You saw the food bank doing direct distributions and trucks and people and lines of cars, and in the capital region we never really seen that before, and it was like, wow, this is I remember just lines of cars weaving around SUNY Albany, for example, and I remember that it's kind of a wake up that, wow, there is this like level of need that maybe I didn't know about. So I think that has helped people understand that food insecurity is an issue and hunger is a real issue. Every change of administration, every change in government, every change in Congress, I mean, there's always going to be changes, right? There's always going to be, we just live in this era of, you just have to know that, I had worked in Washington, I worked in the state assembly. So like I had a sense of like different governors, different priorities, right? Different presidents, different priorities, different Congresses, different priorities. And you just kind of prepare for those. The first one was, cuts at USDA. We receive a lot of food from the USDA program created under Roosevelt. The Emergency Food Assistance Program, been going on for a long time. And it's really a way to stabilize farm commodities. That's why that program was created. We need that food. That's protein. It's, we get fish, we get, meat, we get, chicken, poultry from all around the country. So that's very important. So that program had been cut. So we had already had that. We made up for that by getting more donated product, right? So there was a response. So there was something we could do about it. So we could say, look, we can actually go get more donated. And so some people would argue and say, well, that's good, right? That you're getting more private donations instead of relying on the government. We didn't quite make up the full amount. We lost 6 million pounds of USDA. We increased our donated food by over 4 million pounds last year. Huge effort, more trucks, more volunteers, more people. So it cost us a lot more to do those things. But there was a response. SNAP is something that, this will tell you why I jumped out front on it. I never, ever would have expected that SNAP would have been on the table during a federal budget negotiation. I just didn't think that would be a thing. And once I kind of saw that it was real, I was like, we have to raise the alarm. We have to talk about this. This has to be front and center in everything we do. Not to be alarmist, but to be truthful, to say, look, if there is no SNAP, in our service area, SNAP provides food for the equivalent of 30 million pounds a month. We do 50 million pounds a year. There is no resource of it. There's no fixing that. There's no donated. There's no answer for that. It's one of those programs that the federal government, governments have a responsibility to do certain things. That's one of the things that there's a responsibility. Fix the system, fix processes, whatever, all of it. Every program like that can always use innovation, can always use review. That's fair. But to cut it wholesale, we're glad that ultimately, obviously, it didn't cut, but it required us to respond, because the minute that people thought that their benefits would be cut, there was a run on pantries. And we're today still dealing with that run that happened. So here we are months. So the after effects will be felt months later, October, November, December, January now. And so we're still doing extra distributions to help food pantries refill their shelves from the food that was come and claimed, during that SNAP crisis. So I think that, and that's something that you just have to be ready for. We didn't know it was coming. Couldn't have predicted it. our team responded right away. And I think that, had gotten national exposure because of the way we responded. Good Morning America covered our distribution, but also, I was was featured on a panel with my Feeding America colleagues, all 200 food banks, just talking about our response to SNAP. And ultimately, they settled it. They settled the budget. They passed SNAP for this year too. So we're good to the end of the year. But but in this business, you never know, right? No one predicted COVID. No one could have predicted the next public health crisis, the next natural disaster. And in an organization like this, you just got to know there's crisis will come, and you have to just be as ready as you can.
Talked about when you first came in and you were exposed to it, and you got to see the day-to-day, and you talked about your current your paid workforce. What's it like daily, hourly, to go downstairs or just go across the floor and see that volunteer workforce that's here daily, multiple shifts, volunteering, putting together packages? I mean, and you said multiple shifts a day, coming in, people volunteering, all doing this on behalf for the greater good. What's that like?
I can't wrap my head around it to this day. It's one of those things like, we have it's called 185 staff here, right? And that's finite, and you can figure out how to move people around and where they need to go, and maybe you add some staff, you lose some staff, you're trying to do some different things. I mean, it's manageable. The volunteerism at this organization, so 24,000 people a year volunteer. I mean, if you were to create that from scratch, I don't know how you would create that, right? And this is just decades worth of people giving. And that's the one thing I'll say that I've learned here is that there are a lot of good people in the Capital Region. Of all the things you hear, all the strife and the politics and the social media, blah, 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 at the end of the day, there's really good people that really do good work, and they do it quietly. We have a lot of quiet people. We have a lot of people who donate to this organization that you would never know their name. They don't show up on the pages of business pages. Like, they're just good people who just care and want to do something positive. And that's what we get here. Like, that volunteer force in our distribution center here and in Orange County, 7 days a week, up to 4 shifts a day of 30 people sorting food, sorting it and reboxing it. Stuff that came in today will get sorted tonight and be distributed tomorrow. It's so quick. It's such a quick, it's like military level precision, just like boom, it comes in, we sort it, it goes out, and in our farm too. We have a farm in Voorheesville in Albany County near Thatcher Park. Thousands of people go out there and they pick rocks, they plant seeds, they work in our greenhouse, they tend to weeds, they harvest. I mean, thousands of people. And then you'll see those, tons of cabbage come in here. That was volunteer planted. So that part it's unbelievable, and it's hard to wrap my head around how many people. And you see the same people, and you have people, and it makes sense, right? Like, I think this is something I'll do in retirement. It's like, I love the in terms of what would I do, volunteer. People show up. I'll see the same person at a distribution in Lansenburg, and then I'll see that person, in Amsterdam. I'm like, what are you following each other around? But they people just love to participate.
All right, we're gonna get you out of here on the toughest question.
All right.
Okay. What's next?
I thought you were going to ask me something about Schenectady, about what do I know about the people. By the way, I love this job because, when I worked in politics, when I had Gramercy, one of the best parts of those jobs was I got to know and deal with people all over the Capital Region, right? And look, Schenectady's special. There's a lot of special people in Schenectady, right? There's a lot of people super committed to that town. And it's great to see now in this new job that I have that those same people care about business, they care about downtown, they care about moving the needle, but they also care about helping people that need support. So it's great for me in this new job to kind of come back around and see all the old people I used to work with and see, their commitment to these local communities. And it's really community based. It's really like community by community. It's like what's happening in Troy, what happens in Schenectady, what happens in Albany, and on and on. And so that's been a great part of this job. So 3 years in, trying to figure out what do I want to be when I grow up, right? So I think that's the question we're all trying to figure out now. But this has been I've had a great run here. It's been a great organization. I'm committed to this organization. Mark Quant was the founding executive director here. He was here for 38 years. I will not be here for 38 years. I've said that publicly. I've told him that. He's still an active volunteer. We appreciate everything he's done at this organization to get it started. It started in Central Warehouse in downtown Albany, by the way, with just 2 staff members. But I just re-signed a contract to be here for 3 more years. Something that I had talked to the board about, and I said, I think the organization had been through some change after he had left. There had been an executive director before me, and then I came in. I think that I have an obligation to provide some more stability. There's things that we haven't finished yet, and really the budget I presented at the end of the year to my board was stabilization. We did the growth. Now we have to stabilize. And that's really my focus. I'm really focused on stabilization. And I think that's a new challenge for me. I think I've always been a growth person. Gramercy grew every quarter I was in business till I sold it. So now it's a new challenge for me to say, okay, can I stabilize this organization? Can I equalize, our locations, the geography? And that's really the focus. I'm excited. I appreciate the support of my board of directors and all the employees here. So hopefully, come back in 3 more years. We'll talk again about what's next.
All right. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. The tour was absolutely fantastic, and sitting down for our annual business outlook section, and then coming in on the podcast. So I can't thank you enough for everything that you've done in the past 3 years, and I can't wait to see what you do for the next 3. And not only here in Albany County, but you've literally planted some seeds for me to get out there and see some of the other growth that you're doing and get some recognition of those other organizations and programs you've got. So it's been fantastic. So I can't thank you enough.
No, thank you. I love what you guys are doing. I love the media group. I love the expansion. I love the changes. Podcasting is important. I think the digital stuff it's all part of it. So great job, and thanks for having me.